Hi, everybody. Welcome to Facebook Live tonight for St. Michael. You might be wondering, where's Father Ed? Why does he look a little different? Where are his glasses? Well, Father Ed's getting a well-deserved night off. I'm Jeremy Helmes, fellow parishioner, and I'm pleased to be with you on our Facebook Live tonight. We are T minus 24 hours until the end of Lent. Wait, hold on a second. Wait, Lent ends tomorrow? You might be thinking, this guy's lost his mind. No, Lent ends on Holy Thursday evening. It ends with the Mass of the Lord's Supper on Holy Thursday begins, and that will begin tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. So we are T minus 24 hours until Lent ends. We'll talk a little more about that in a little bit. Again, I'm Jeremy Helmes, one of your fellow parishioners. Some of you might know me because I'm the father of Nathan in the 7th grade and Will in the 2nd grade at our parish school. I'm also the Cub Master for our parish's Cub Scout pack. I sometimes fill in for Brian when he's on vacation, a well-deserved day off, at the piano and the organ, working with the choir, which is always really fun. And my day job is Director of Worship and Sacraments for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. And so I work for the Archbishop, and I try to help out pastors and parish leaders as they have questions about worship and sacraments in our church. So I'm really happy to be keeping the chair warm for Father Ed tonight. He's got a couple of long days ahead of him, so I'm excited to spend some time with you tonight. Our topic for tonight is the Paschal Triduum, and you might be thinking, I don't even know what that means, so we're going to talk about that. And so as we go forward, please send in your questions over in the comment feed. I'll try to answer them as I can, or share your favorite memory of Holy Thursday, Good Friday, the Easter Vigil, or Easter Sunday. What about these days are special to you? And so that might help you think about this tonight. As I said, our topic tonight is the Paschal Triduum. What is the Paschal Triduum? Well, the Paschal Triduum are 3 days that basically serve as the hinge between Lent and Easter. It's the shortest and most special season of the year. And like I said, it's kind of the hinge point between Lent and Easter. And so we're about to enter into that right now. Before we dig into that, I want to remind you of our parish's schedule for celebrating the Triduum liturgies. Tomorrow evening at 7, we'll have the Mass of the Lord's Supper, which will be live streamed here on Facebook. On Good Friday at 1:30, we'll celebrate the Lord's Passion, the Good Friday liturgy. We won't celebrate the Easter Vigil this year as a parish, but you can tune in and watch the live stream from our own cathedral with Archbishop Schnurr at 8:45 on Saturday night. Very special liturgy, the most important liturgy of the year. And then Sunday morning, we'll be on at 9:30 for Easter Sunday Mass. For those of you who have loved ones who might struggle a little bit with the internet, Fox 19 has graciously agreed to stream the cathedral's live stream at 9:30 a.m. on Sunday morning. So if you know someone who maybe isn't quite as internet savvy as those of you who can do Facebook Live, you can let them know Fox 19 on Sunday morning at 9:30. They'll be streaming from the cathedral. So those are lots of ways to join in. And actually Sunday morning at the cathedral, 9:30 is in Spanish and 11 a.m. will be in English. So the English will be at 11 a.m. Fox 19 on Sunday. So I just wanted to go through that schedule with you so you had a chance to be able to tune in. You can see that on the parish's Facebook page. That's the cover picture. Or check us out on the website. All of those times and dates are there. So what's interesting about this is one of the things that the Second Vatican Council in the 60s did to offer the church was talk about how important the domestic church is. Our church is not simply our parishes, our cathedrals, our dioceses. The church is lived out in our homes. The church is here. And so it's a really special time for us to really realize what that means. And so one of the things we have to work on now is to how do we live out the Triduum here in our homes? How do we live out our faith in our homes? And so that's part of what we're going to talk about tonight as we walk through what we're doing for the Paschal Triduum. One of the things that I often think about when it comes to the Paschal Triduum is the meaning of those words. The word Paschal comes from the Hebrew word Pesach. Pesach is the Hebrew word for Passover. And Passover, of course, for our Jewish brothers and sisters and our ancestors in faith, was this moment, this watershed moment in their life as God's people, where God brought them basically from death to new life, delivered them from slavery. And so they remembered that every year on a feast day called Pesach. Pesach, it gives us the word Pascha in Greek, and Pascha is the root of the word paschal, pastor. Um, all of those words relate to our word that now means sheep. And of course, we know that Jesus for us is both the shepherd, the good shepherd, but also the sheep, the paschal lamb. So for the Jews, when they celebrated Passover, how did the angel of death know to pass over the houses of the firstborn? Well, they sacrificed the Passover lamb, they sacrificed the lamb and smeared the blood on the doorposts. And so the lamb for our Jewish brothers and sisters is still a part of their Seder and Passover meal. And it's a sacrificial animal. And so Jesus becomes for us the new sacrifice, a sacrificial lamb, which is why we still call Jesus the Lamb of God, right? That's the litany we sing at Mass. And so Paschal helps us remember it's the name for Jesus who sacrifices himself for us, but is also our good shepherd. The word triduum is the Latin word when you put together two words, tres and dies, 3 days, 3 days, tres dies. So that gives us the Latin word triduum. So the Paschal Triduum are the 3 days where we focus on Christ, who is the Lamb of sacrifice, who was sacrificed for us, and we spend 3 days focusing on that. The Triduum basically lasts from Holy Thursday evening until Easter Sunday evening, and it begins on with the Mass of the Lord's Supper, the Mass of Holy Thursday, and basically takes us through to Easter Sunday evening. So, contrary to all popular belief, Lent ends tomorrow night at 7 p.m. So if you had Lenten sacrifices that you've been itching to get rid of, well, guess what? Tomorrow at 7, you're freed. Now, that doesn't mean you don't still have to fast and abstain from meat on Friday. And it doesn't mean that you can't fast and sacrifice a little bit on Friday and Saturday. But Lent ends tomorrow at 7. So those 3 days are the holiest 3 days of the year. They're that, like I said, that hinge point between Lent and Easter. And in fact, Easter Sunday is part of the Triduum. So there's a little bit of overlap there. So we talked a little bit about the theology of the Triduum, which I think is really helpful for us to understand that this is a celebration of Jesus's sacrifice for us, his dying, his rising, which is the central mystery of our faith, right? Every day we celebrate lots of different things about our faith. And even on special days of the year like Christmas or Ascension or Pentecost, we're celebrating a particular thing. But at its core, we're celebrating what we call the Paschal mystery, that mystery of Jesus' dying and rising for us. And so this is the central feast day of our church, the central season in which we celebrate Jesus' sacrifice for us. I should start by talking about today. Today traditionally is called Spy Wednesday because this is the day that we traditionally commemorate Judas's act of handing over Jesus to the Sanhedrin for 30 silver pieces. And so the word spy is an ancient one that means to snare or to grab. So today is traditionally observed as what we call Spy Wednesday. But the Triduum starts tomorrow, and it starts with the Mass of the Lord's Supper. And the Mass of the Lord's Supper is a unique Mass because it not only commemorates a few special things, but it also begins this 3-day Triduum celebration. So it's the opening of the Triduum as well as commemorating a few things. Of course, things are going to be different this year because most of us are not going to be able to be in our churches, which is sad in many ways, but we're just going to have to make the best of it this year. The Holy Thursday Mass commemorates a couple of different unique things. It's a day annually where we commemorate the institution of the Eucharist. And that's our particular focus as we hear the narrative of Jesus's Last Supper, and we hear the story from John's Gospel about Jesus washing the feet of his friends. And it's a night we commemorate the institution of the Eucharist, that sacrament in bread and wine that become the body and blood of Jesus. It's also a night that we celebrate the institution of the ministerial priesthood. All of us at our baptism are anointed priests and prophet and king, and nowhere is that more important than for parents now who act as priests in the midst of their families. But we celebrate the institution of the ministerial priesthood, which is so important for us as a church. But the Holy Thursday liturgy opens the entire Triduum. The text that's given for us in the Roman Missal, the book that priests use for Mass, it talks about we should glory in the cross of Christ, our sacrifice, our salvation. Through him we are delivered and set free. And so it's not really just about Holy Thursday as we open the liturgy on Holy Thursday night. It's actually about these whole 3 days. As I mentioned at the Holy Thursday liturgy, there's a couple of particular things we commemorate, but we also traditionally receive the holy oils that were blessed at the Chrism Mass. Father Ed talked about the Chrism Mass a little bit on his Facebook Live yesterday. The Chrism Mass is a special Mass celebrated by the Archbishop at the Cathedral, where we bless new oils of catechumens, the oil of sick, and the oil of chrism that we use for the sacraments throughout the year. And so those oils were blessed by Archbishop Schnurr on Tuesday, and then they're given to the parishes, and we receive them on Thursday. And those oils then are used for the sacraments of initiation throughout the Easter season. The scriptures for Holy Thursday focus on the night of Jesus' Last Supper. And so, like I mentioned, we hear first a reading from Exodus, which is the Passover story. And then we hear from Paul's letter to the Corinthians about the institution of the Eucharist. And then the gospel reading, where you might be expecting the narrative from the gospel about the Last Supper, the church gives us the Gospel of John. And in John's passage about how Jesus takes a towel and washes the feet of his friends. And I think this is really important for us, because what we have to understand about the Eucharist is it's intimately connected, inseparable to service. And so we can only realize the meaning of the Eucharist in our lives when we're of service to others. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end, about how we can commemorate that in our families and our homes right now. So if we were in our churches, there would be a washing of feet. This year, there is no washing of feet, even in the small, limited liturgies. The Holy Father just said, you know what, we're just going to skip that this year. So that won't be part of our liturgy for this year. One of the special things about Holy Thursday is that it traditionally ends with a special procession with the Blessed Sacrament. What we do on Holy Thursday night is we commemorate enough consecrated bread, we consecrate enough bread for communion on Good Friday, because there is no Mass on Good Friday. But we still receive Holy Communion. And so Holy Thursday night, we have a surplus of the Blessed Sacrament that we then have a special procession to wherever that place of reposition is going to be. This year, it's going to be in our normal tabernacle, because that's one of the changes for this year. But one of the traditional things to do on Holy Thursday is to spend some time in adoration. And in fact, a tradition of many, many communities around the world, religious brothers and sisters, parishes and others, is to visit a lot of different churches and to pray in the church in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. And so that's something we'll miss out on a little bit this year. But that doesn't mean you can't still take some time after Mass on Thursday night to pray as a family in your home. And the church, in some ways, keeps watch. We keep watch, just like the disciples in the garden, where Jesus said, stay here and keep watch with me. And so the church does that on Holy Thursday night as we anticipate Good Friday. One of the things you could do as a family on Holy Thursday to celebrate this special day, maybe you fix a special dinner. If you've given up something special for Lent, maybe that's part of your dinner. This is a moment to kind of change gears. Lent is over. If you had Lenten pictures or Lenten statues or something special in your home about Lent, it's time for that to go away. I have an icon that hangs in our hallway here in our house, and it's a Lenten icon right now, but I'm going to change it out, probably take it down for a few days, and then put up the Easter icon on Sunday. Maybe there's a ritual that you all could do as a family to wash one another's feet. That's something we do in church, and you could do that in your home. Find a new way to think about how you can serve your own family members better. How can parents be better servants to their kids? How can kids be better servants to their parents? How can you better serve your spouse? How can your siblings better serve one another? That's a really important thing for you to do when it comes to Holy Thursday. It's a way to celebrate this special day. As we think about Good Friday then, Good Friday, of course, is a day we're all really familiar with. Good Friday is a day on which we commemorate the Lord's death. And it's a day that's pretty palpable for us. I think most of us, when we were kids, we either had off school on Friday or our parents were off on Good Friday. Some of that has fallen away. It's not quite the same for society these days. But Good Friday is observed pretty universally by Christians as a special day to commemorate Jesus' death. Again, that central mystery of our faith, Jesus' death and resurrection. On Good Friday, as I said, there is no Mass. It's the one day of the year where you cannot and do not have Mass. That's a long-standing tradition in the Church. And so for us, there is no Mass on Good Friday. But that doesn't mean the church doesn't gather to pray. There's lots of devotional and ways outside of the main liturgy to pray, right? Stations of the Cross, reflecting on the 7 last words of Christ. There's all sorts of different ways we might pray on Good Friday. Somebody just mentioned that praying the steps at Holy Cross Immaculata, which has been a long-standing tradition in Cincinnati, that's not going to happen this year. One more victim, if you will, of social distancing. So, but there's lots of different ways to pray. And of course, the central thing that we do on Good Friday is to celebrate what we call the Liturgy of the Lord's Passion. And here at St. Michael, we'll do that at 1:30 on Friday. And this is a liturgy that has several parts to it. It has a liturgy of the Word, like most other liturgies of the Word readings, but it includes the reading of the Passion, just like we did on Palm Sunday, except that every year on Palm Sunday, we rotate which of the Gospel readers we hear from, Matthew, Mark, or Luke. On Good Friday, we always hear the Passion account according to St. John. The Good Friday liturgy is notably because as they enter, the priest, and if there's a deacon, the deacon, literally prostrate themselves before the altar. They lay on the floor as a sign of humility, and that's a special way that the Good Friday liturgy begins. After the Passion reading, there's usually a short homily, and then there's a series of extended intercessions or petitions or intentions. There's 10 of them, and they're very ancient, they're very traditional. They've been used for years, generations, eons, so that's really special. This year, the Holy Father has asked that there be an 11th intercession added, a special intercession in light of the pandemic in our world, to pray for the sick, for healthcare workers, and for the dying. So you can listen and pray, especially. That'll be the last intercession on Good Friday in our intercessions. After the Liturgy of the Word and the intercessions conclude, we have what's called the Adoration of the Cross. And we're all pretty familiar with this, I think, that a large cross is brought forward or unveiled if it was covered, and people have an opportunity to adore the cross, to venerate it by touching it, by kissing it, by genuflecting before it. A really powerful symbol, right? These are important things that we've done, our families have done, and so this is a concrete part of our Catholic practice and our sacramental life. It'll be a little different this year because we won't be able to do that in the church, but that certainly doesn't mean that you couldn't venerate at the time of your watching the live stream, or at some other time, you could venerate one of the crucifixes in your house. That's certainly an opportunity there for you. The Good Friday liturgy concludes with Holy Communion, as I mentioned. It's the one day of the year we can't have Mass, but we still receive communion as food for our journey. So it's a very unique thing on this day to have communion outside of Mass. That's pretty unusual. Good Friday, of course, is a day of quiet. It's a day of contemplation. It's a day where we, in some ways, take a really retrospective, introspective look. So, of course, I mentioned that Lent was over by now, but we're still fasting and abstaining from meat. And there might still be some other sacrifices you could make this day, whether it's a different sacrifice or to continue your other sacrifices that you have. On Holy Saturday, the church, in some ways, is with Jesus in the tomb. It's a day of quiet. It's a day of reflection. It's a day of preparation. In some cultures, people would do things like bring an Easter basket to be blessed up at the parish. Lots of families are very busy preparing for Easter dinners and those kinds of things. Holy Saturday is marked, though, also by the first liturgy of Easter. And that liturgy takes place at night. And that liturgy takes place after dark. It's a really, really special liturgy that takes place. It's the high point of the liturgical year. It's the most important liturgy we celebrate because we commemorate many, 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 many things in this liturgy called the Easter Vigil. The Easter Vigil is the first Mass of Easter Sunday, and it's also the high point of the Triduum. Everything in our liturgical year leads up to the Easter Vigil, and then everything we do afterwards helps unpack our celebration of the Easter Vigil. It's the high point, the crowning of our celebration of the Paschal Mystery. As I mentioned, the Easter Vigil starts after dark, and so you can view the live stream of the Easter Vigil from our cathedral at St. Peter in Chains with Archbishop Schnurr on Saturday night at 8:45 p.m. It can't start until after dark. It starts after nightfall, and so here in this part of the Eastern time zone, that means later than 8:45, and so that's when we'll start. An important reason for that, of course, is that it's a liturgy that's based on the imagery of darkness and light. I mentioned before our Jewish ancestors and their commemoration of Passover, which they're doing this week as well. But as part of their other struggles they had in life, right? Remember, they crossed the Red Sea. They went from darkness into light. And so we commemorate that as part of our celebration of the Easter Vigil. So it starts in darkness. Normally there's a big fire from which we light our new Paschal candle. This year, the Paschal candle will just be lit without much ceremony, and that's, again, kind of sad. But the Paschal candle still remains as a symbol for us. And every year at the Easter Vigil, we hear this beautiful hymn called the Exultet, which is a hymn to Christ, who is the light of the world and is symbolized by this new Paschal candle that burns bright throughout the 50 days of Easter. And then it all continues to be lit at funerals and baptisms. And so that Paschal candle will still be lit and be new for us in our church. The Easter Vigil is an extended liturgy. There are 7 readings from the Old Testament. And what's interesting is the church says, well, if you've got a good reason, you can shorten the number of readings, but normally you should do all 7 of them. And so these readings in the Easter Vigil, we hear the creation story from Genesis. We hear the story of Abraham and Isaac and how Abraham is tested by God. We hear the Exodus story, right? The crossing of the Red Sea. We hear from the prophet Isaiah, from the prophet Baruch. We hear from the prophet Ezekiel. So we hear all of these passages of our salvation history from the Old Testament. And then we hear also an epistle from St. Paul's letter to the Romans, where Paul talks to us about death and life, or those of us who are baptized into Christ are baptized into his death. But then we come to life, and we then sing the Alleluia for the first time in 40 days. And then we hear the passage from Matthew, Mark, or this year it'll be Matthew or Luke and other years, about the resurrection and Mary Magdalene and the other Mary going to the tomb and realizing that the Lord is not there. After the Liturgy of the Word, there's the Liturgy of Baptism. So normally those adults who are preparing to be baptized would be baptized this night. Again, this intimate connection between Jesus's resurrection, his death and resurrection, and our baptism, and the imagery of going under the water, like going into the tomb, and coming out with having been reborn into new life. So it's sad this year to not be able to celebrate that on Easter. One of the great things is, though, is in our archdiocese, we're encouraging parishes to celebrate the baptism of adults on Pentecost, at the Vigil Mass of Pentecost. So hopefully we'll be out of our homes and into our churches by then. Saturday, May 30th, that will be a great day. So this year, instead of having a full liturgy of baptism, we'll simply have an opportunity to renew our baptismal promises, which is an important thing that we do once a year. Again, the connection between baptism and Easter being so strong. We'd have a new, if it were a different time, we'd have a new flowing font of fresh water. This year we won't put the water back in until things get a little bit calmer in terms of the virus spread. And then this is the first Mass of Easter. Then we have the Liturgy of the Eucharist, and we celebrate the Eucharist together as the first Mass of Easter. Easter Sunday morning then continues our Triduum celebration. And of course, we're all pretty familiar with what happens on Easter Sunday. Again, the baptismal promises can be renewed. That's an important part of who we are. And normally there might be a sprinkling rite with that clean, fresh water that we just got the night before at the Easter Vigil. The official end of the Triduum is Easter Sunday night. And so on Easter Sunday night, the church prays the Liturgy of the Hours pretty consistently. You've heard Father Ed talk about the Liturgy of the Hours on Facebook Live already. And Easter Sunday evening prayer is an important part. And that's something you could do as a family. And I'll talk about some ways to find those resources so you can find ways to pray during the Triduum. One of the things I recommend for people if they're looking for something to do, especially during the Triduum, I mean, it's always good to read the Bible, right? That doesn't really need to be a special recommendation for times of pandemic or during the Triduum. But one of the things I'd recommend for the Triduum, if you're looking for a particular portion of the Bible to read, I would look at the letter to the Hebrews. And in the letter to the Hebrews, there's a great, great narration of what it is we're celebrating. Not a play-by-play of the last days, but what it is that we're celebrating, why God chose to save us in this way, and what Jesus' dying and rising means for us as Christians. And so you could read the letter to the Hebrews over the next 3 days, and that might be a good set of spiritual reading for you. I want to remind you about the schedule for here at St. Michael, and then there's a couple of things that came up in the comments that I'm happy to answer some questions. If you have other questions about the Paschal Triduum, send them in over there in the comments. A couple of reminders: Holy Thursday will be live streaming at 7. On Good Friday, we'll be live streaming at 1. As I said, the Easter Vigil on Holy Saturday night will be at 8:45 p.m. at the Cathedral with Archbishop Schnurr. And then on Easter Sunday morning, you can follow us here on Facebook at 9:30 for Mass from St. Michael, or at 11 o'clock from Mass from our Cathedral with Bishop Binzer. And then prior to that, that'll be on Fox 19, by the way, the one from the Cathedral. And then at 9:30 a.m. on Sunday on the internet, only on our CatholicCincinnati.org, you can view the Spanish Mass for Easter Sunday. So hopefully all those options there will give you a way to follow these important Triduum liturgies as they're taking place in our parish church and in the cathedral. One of the things I wanted to say before I do some of the questions, I think it's important for us, and see, I don't work for the parish, so I can say this pretty easily. I think it's really important for us to continue to support our parish community, not only during these 3 days, but especially during this time of pandemic. I am totally aware of how much hurt there is in the world right now. People physically sick, and people treating those who are sick, and many people who are now unemployed or maybe have been furloughed or hours reduced. That being said, our parish counts on our support. We are St. Michael. We are our parish. And I promise Father Ed didn't ask me to say this at all. This is just me. We need to be able to support our parish community. So certainly, the way you can financially support the parish through our online giving, sending in envelopes, contributing to our St. Vincent de Paul Society, right? People are still in need. They have great need. The virtual Easter flowers contribution is something you can do. The financial support is really important. But you know what else we can do? I think it's really important to support not only our parish staff, who are still working really hard to help our parish community function during this time and to keep things afloat in the meantime, but also don't forget to reach out to Father Norm and to Father Ed. I think many of us realize how hard it is to be away from our parish church during this time and to participate fully in the life of the church. But I can tell you, because part of my job is speaking to priests pretty much all day, every day, I can tell you they really miss us being in the pews in church. It's as hard for them to miss us as it is for us to miss church and being with our priests. I really encourage you to, send an email, leave a voicemail, send a text, send a card, reach out in an appropriately socially distanced way to Father Norm and Father Ed, because they'll appreciate hearing from you, especially during this time. I want to point you to some resources that you might be able to use for your own prayer or prayer as a family. On my office's website, which is CatholicCincinnati.org, that's the Archdiocesan website, CatholicCincinnati.org/worship, you'll find a whole bunch of different resources. But at the very top, there's a link to resources for worship and sacraments in this time of pandemic. And there's lots of different documents on that page. You'll find all the policies that are there for all of our parish churches and how we're going to do things in a special way during this time. But you'll also find there a whole section of resources for the ability to pray at home. One of our great liturgical publishers, Liturgical Press, has published a resource called Holy Week at Home. And I would encourage you to check that out. You can find that on our website there. You can also go to litpress.org. And you'll find Holy Week at Home there. And it's a great digital resource that you can download for free. And it has the scriptures for these days, and it has some activities and exercises you can do as a family. So I would encourage you to check out Holy Week at Home. It's available in both English and Spanish, by the way. So if nothing else, it might be a way to keep your St. Michael school students up on their Spanish during these days, even on their spring break. Lots of different resources out there for us to be able to pray at home. Somebody asked a question, why does our year start at Advent instead of Easter, if Easter is such an important feast? Really great question. You have to remember that in the early days, the Christians didn't have a liturgical year. They simply celebrated Sundays. They celebrated Sundays because Sunday was the day of the Lord's resurrection. That was the day they commemorated the rising of Jesus. It wasn't until several hundred years later that they started to have an annual celebration, Pascha, which was based on the Jewish celebration of Passover. But eventually the liturgical year developed over time, and what it did was conform to the mystery of our Lord's life. So what it did was we commemorate the beginning of our Lord's life here on earth by having that Advent celebration in which we welcome Jesus into the world. We celebrate Christmas, a little bit of ordinary time, and then we celebrate the Paschal mystery in a particular way through the Paschal cycle, what we call Lent, Triduum, and Easter, those 90 days together. And then as the year progresses, it leads us toward the end of the liturgical year in November, where we're celebrating the end days, where Jesus will come again at the end of time. And so our year basically goes from Advent through Christ the King. And that's the way the liturgical year unfolds. Somebody mentioned on the comments that the Archdiocese of Turin in Italy will be exposing the Shroud of Turin at 11 a.m. our time. So that's pretty interesting. I think that would definitely be worth checking out for sure. So I hope this has been useful for you tonight. Feel free to share this with your friends. And don't be afraid to hit me up with any other questions you have about worship and sacraments during a time of pandemic, or really any time. You can catch me through my office's webpage, or find me on Facebook, or find me in the parish and school directory. Always happy to chat about worship and sacraments. I hope that for your family, the next 3 days are a time of great blessing, and that when we reach the celebration of Easter, it'll be a time of great grace for our church, for our families as well. So have a great night. Have a great Triduum. Wash your hands.